This morning I'm going to share my first of two Christmas messages for this year. These will mainly be topical studies, but I almost can't hardly do that with a little bit of verse-by-verse study in the mix as well, so there will be a little bit of that. I'm going to open this up with a question, and it's an important question. It's for sure germane to the text that we're going to read. I would say it's foundational to the message. We are definitely going to come back to it in just a little while. So here's the important question. Is 6 miles too far to walk? Is 6 miles too far to walk? Now, I don't want you to answer these questions. I want you just to think about these questions because I'm going to answer them for you. Is 6 miles too far to walk? Let me say that another way. If walking was your only option and you had to cover a distance of 6 miles, is that too far of a distance? Since many of us are not used to extended walks, myself included, I love it, but I just don't do it nearly as much. I spend a whole lot more time sitting behind my desk. Let me just help you with this and give you the numbers. 6 miles is not a very far distance. It really doesn't take a very long time to walk. The average human being walks at a pace of 3 miles per hour. That's just your average Joe. That's not the athlete. That's not the person running the treadmill for 5 miles every day. It's just your average Joe, 3 miles per hour. So to walk 6 miles, that would take you about 2 hours, unless you maybe weren't in the best of shape and you stopped and took a 15-minute nap along the way. Okay, then you could do it in 2:15. Maybe 2.5 hours if you were really lollygagging and stopping to smell the roses and whatnot. But generally speaking, 2 hours, that's a pretty good time frame for a 6-mile walk. Okay, now let me complicate things for you just a bit. Let's say you were craving a very specific food. Middle of the day, you're thinking about lunch. You're craving a very specific food, but you check your cupboards and the ingredients aren't there. You're missing some ingredients. And you know that there's a store near your house just 3 miles away. So this would be a round trip for you. You can go get your ingredients 3 miles out to the store, 3 miles back, 2 hours total of walking, however long it takes you to do the shopping, maybe 2:15, 2.5, and you're back, and then you get to feed that food craving that you had. Now, is that worth it for you? Would you walk a total of 6 miles, a total of 2 hours of walking, just to satisfy a food craving? I'm going to take a guess here. Maybe I underestimate how much some of you like food, but I'm just going to take a guess and say that if you knew you had to walk, that was your only course of action there, you would probably just choose to eat something else as opposed to walking for 2 hours, 6 miles, just to get some ingredients so that you could soothe some kind of drive in you, some kind of food craving. I think most of us would feel that way. You just wait until you have access to a vehicle, and then you go get those ingredients when you do your food shopping, and hey, in a couple days or a week or two, then you get to have that food that you were craving. But it's just convenient. It's reasonable. It makes sense to say, oh, man, I would really like that specific food. I'm craving that, but come on, it's 6 miles. I don't have a vehicle. I'm not going to walk that. I'm just going to eat something else for the time being. Okay, now, what if there was a store just 3 miles away from you, and for one day only, they were giving away the product, the possession that you want most in life? It was only for that day. They were giving it away completely free. They promised that when you showed up, no matter how many people showed up, you'd get exactly what you wanted in exactly the color that you want and exactly the specifications that you want. So whatever that possession is, that product is that you're wanting the most right now, maybe it's the latest and greatest iPhone or Android or that new computer or a new vehicle so you don't have to walk 3 miles back and forth to the store, whatever it is you're thinking of right now, that possession you want the most, you know it's going to be given to you for free if you walk out 3 miles and pick it up and then walk back 3 miles with it. I hope it's not a refrigerator that you're in need of. But if it's a vehicle, okay, then you know it's a 6-mile walk to the dealer. He gives you that shiny new Silverado or, I don't know, Yukon or whatever else. Whatever vehicle you're wanting the most, your Kia, your Mitsubishi, and then you get to drive it home. 6 miles. Now, is that worth it? Are you walking, and this is all assuming that, of course, you're healthy enough for an extended walk. If you're not, think back to the days when you were. Is that worth it? Are you going to walk 3 miles out to get that possession? Are you going to walk 3 miles back with it? Are you going to walk 6 miles to get that brand new vehicle and drive away in it? I think safe to say, again, unless I underestimate this time your laziness, I'm going to say, safe to say, I think every one of us would say yes. That 6-mile walk is worth it. I mean, totally worth it. I would walk further than that to get that product for free that I'm wanting right now the most. What that really is doing is that's establishing for us that a 6-mile walk is way too far for some things, but it's not very far at all for other things. So unimportant stuff, yes. 6 miles, that's way too far to walk for something unimportant. But important stuff, no, absolutely not. 6 miles is absolutely nothing to the standard human being with standard health. So what that does is that effectively gives our sermon question a qualifier. Is 6 miles too far to walk? Very subjective question. The answer is it completely depends on what I'm walking for. Am I walking for something important or something unimportant? Now just hang on to that for a bit. That is the foundation for the remainder of this message. And with that in tow, let's now read the account of the wise men. Everybody knows the account of the wise men, I think, right? Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Let's read down through that. We're going to study down through that. I'm going to pick it apart a little bit, but we're going to come back to our main point for this Christmas message. Verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born, so yes, this account that we are studying today actually took place after Jesus was already born. I know you're not supposed to do this kind of message before Christmas. This is a post-Christmas message, but we don't exactly follow the typical church rules here at Anchored Fellowship. This is the message that was on my heart, so I'm going to give it. This is taking place after Jesus was already born. We'll get into that a little bit more in just a moment. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. So this would be Herod the Great that we're speaking about here. I've done some pretty in-depth studies on this guy before. I do not want to get into an exhaustive study of this character this morning. It's outside the scope of the message. Concisely put, this guy was a nutcase. He had a violent temper, and when he was angry, you never really knew what he was going to do. He had his own family members killed, his wives, his sons. He was an absolute nutcase, but he was the guy that was serving as the pawn or the puppet for Rome. He was appointed to be, quote unquote, the king of Israel. He wasn't even a full-blooded Jew. He was an Idumean. He came from the descent of Esau, not Jacob. But Rome put him in charge to give Israel the illusion that they had some sovereignty about them, that there was some self-rule there. And that wasn't true. It was all an illusion. But this was the guy the Jews generally hated him. He knew that, and he was constantly trying to prove himself to them. But this is the guy that is king at the time of the birth of Jesus. And reading on, it says, "Behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem." Now, that title, wise men, that comes from the Greek word magi. Different tenses of that same word are given to us in Acts chapter 8 when speaking about Simon the sorcerer or Simon the magician. That's the same word, just different tenses there. So that's what magi means. It means a sorcerer or magician. And the wise men of Matthew 2 here, that's what they are. They're magi. They're magicians. They're sorcerers. They are engaged in occultic practices. Based on this very account that we're looking at, they were definitely into astronomy. And you could say very accurately, I think, that dips into astrology a little bit. What is astrology? That's a pseudoscience. It's a religious science. It's an occultic sorcery is what it is. It's an occultic science. Wise men here, that's a plural word because it's coming from magi. That's the plural tense. So we know there's more than one wise men or more than one magi. How many are there? We don't know. Right. Now, we associate it with three wise men. And we even sing the song, We Three Kings of Orient Are, right? And we get that because the gifts that they bring, there's three gifts. Gold, frankincense, and wait, there's more. Myrrh. So there's three. I have to get that in at least once at Christmas. At least it's out of the way now. So, yeah, there were three gifts, and that's always the portrayal, the representation that there were three wise men. We don't know how many there were. We know there was more than one wise man. There could have been 20. Who knows? This could have been like a break from daily magi classes in order to take a magi field trip. There could have been many of them, but they're magicians. They're on the move from the east to Jerusalem. Verse 2, the wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" And just quickly there, you'll notice it doesn't say, "Where is he who has been born to become the King of the Jews?" It says, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" That means this child, we know it's Christ, Jesus, whoever he is to the Magi, they knew he was going to be born a king from birth. And then it says, "For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now, the first thing I want to do here with this story is find out exactly where these magi are from. I don't know if you think we can do that or not. Trust me, we can totally do that. The text says they came from the east. So we're going to do a real easy exercise here. We're going to pull up a map of Israel with some real estate toward the east. We're going to start at Jerusalem. That's where they're going to. We're going to go east. And we're going to see, do we have that map ready? And we're going to see if the map is, in fact, going to come up on the screen. We're going to see whether or not we can find a location of interest that is east of Jerusalem, something that maybe we can connect to Jerusalem, to the Jews, to make sense of where these magi might have come from. Do we have that screen? All right. If not, I'll just have to tell you, we can do this without the maps. It's going to take a minute. All right, well, let's not worry about it then. Don't worry about it. Come sit back down. Let me answer this for you verbally without the TV screen here. If you take a look at a map and take a look at the city of Jerusalem and you start looking due east, directly east, here's what you're going to do. You're going to come all the way across the Arabian desert. You're going to see no city names. You're going to cross the entire Arabian desert. This is heading west, right? Jerusalem is west. You're heading east. And the first city that you're going to come to, guess what it's called? Does anyone know? It's called Babylon. That's the first city you come to when you head east of Jerusalem, the first big city, really the first city on the other side of the Jordan. And we ask the question, is there any significance to that? Does Babylon connect to the Jews in any way? Does it connect to Jerusalem in any way? Could it be possible that these wise men, these magi, came from Babylon? And the answer to that question is, of course, yes. Actually, this makes a whole lot of sense. This is definitely, there it is, a location of interest. You see this? Just so you don't think I'm making this up. Look, you got Jerusalem here. You got nothing but pretty much desert in the Arabian desert here. Come all the way east, and the first city you're really going to come to is Babylon. Now, we start to explore the connection between the Jews, between Jerusalem and Babylon, and what do we come up with? And this is real easy. If you've even studied biblical history on a surface level, you've probably heard about the Babylonian captivity, right? About 600 years before the event that we're studying, the Jews, the nation of Israel, they were taken into captivity, into Babylonian captivity. That happened in waves, but essentially, let me break this down to the VIP that I think makes the connection for us. That is a guy by the name of Daniel. And if you've read the book of Daniel, you know Daniel was a prophet, and he was one of the guys that was taken into Babylonian captivity, and he actually worked his way up among the Magi. Yes, believe it or not, there were Magi in Babylon. That's told to us right in the book of Daniel. Now that's written in Hebrew, and Magi is a Greek word, so it's not the same exact word, but the word in Hebrew means the same as the Greek word magi. In fact, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures, when you're reading the book of Daniel, you'll be reading about the Magi, the magicians, the sorcerers of Babylon. And Daniel had the opportunity to climb the ladder of influence there in Babylon because he was able to interpret dreams. He ended up leveraging himself into a position where he was the chiefest of all the quote-unquote magi. And during that time, Daniel wrote a book of prophecy. It was called the Book of Daniel. And in that book, it was a book of prophecy concerning particularly the Jewish nation, the people of Israel, the city of Jerusalem. And because of prophecies being about Jerusalem and the Jews, what do you think the predominant thing of all of his prophecies were? The predominant thing was the coming of Christ. His predictions and prophecies of the coming of the Messiah, the one that would be born King of the Jews. So if we're asking the question, how can we make this connection? Who were these guys from the East? How did they know about this Messiah, this one that was going to be born King of the Jews? I think right there is the connection you have to make. I think that's your answer. These were guys that were well acquainted with Daniel. They would have probably read his writings. They certainly would have had conversations with him, and this got passed down for generations, no doubt, so that 600 years later, at the time of the coming of Messiah, they know the time frame because Daniel predicted the exact time frame of Jesus' coming. He gave us to the day of when Jesus would triumphantly march into the city of Jerusalem and declare himself to be the Messiah to the Jewish people. Daniel had all of those specifics, so they knew that. They knew the time frame. They knew the general time frame. They knew the general area. Now, Daniel only ever mentioned Jerusalem, but that was getting them close, right? And so this would be the information that they had used once they saw the star rise. Now, be careful with this passage. We read that they saw the star rise, and they came to Jerusalem because they saw the star rise. I think a lot of people believe that the Magi followed a star all the way from the east, all the way to Jerusalem. That's not how it happened. But from their place, from their location in the east, they saw a star rise. And when they saw that star rise, they could tell it was in the general direction of west. And so they headed west. They made the trek. They journeyed west. They came to the only location that Daniel gave them in prophecy, which was Jerusalem. And they figured, surely someone in Jerusalem is going to be able to tell us where the Jewish Messiah, the King of Kings, is going to be born. And they would be right about that. So this is giving us a very necessary connection that I think we need here to do this study. Verse 3, it says that when King Herod heard this, he was troubled. He was troubled because he was the quote-unquote official king of Israel, and he did not want competition for his throne. He was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, because when Herod was troubled, so was everyone else in Jerusalem. Because you just never knew what horrific thing Herod the Great was going to do when he was having a bad day or found himself to be in a bad mood. Verse 4, and assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Verse 5, and they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, verse 6, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah or Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So the chief priests, those were the leading priests in the temple within the religion of Judaism. The scribes, they were those who transcribed copies of the Old Testament scriptures meticulously. They did it letter by letter, word by word, very carefully transcribing copies of the scriptures. They did not have a printing press. The scribes were the printing press. So because of that, leaders, chief priests, leaders of the people, scribes who were very carefully copying the law, this group of people, they were the best of the best when it came to Bible knowledge. I mean, they had the majority of all of the Old Testament scriptures memorized. They knew their scriptures. Yes, they definitely put us to shame. And I definitely mean myself in that. Compared to these guys, they knew it all. They had it in memory. They were constantly in it. So, of course, these guys would be able to answer Herod's question. He gets this think tank together, maybe expecting for it to be some exercise in research. But all he really has to do is ask the chief priests and the scribes, and it's pretty obvious. Oh, yeah, we absolutely know the location where that's going to be. We absolutely know what the scriptures foretell concerning the location of the birth of Messiah. And we read it right here in verses 5 and 6. They just absolutely knew the answer. Of course they did. It sure seems like they didn't even need to look it up. It sure seems like they didn't even need to quote it. If they did have to quote it, I can promise you they didn't have to research. They didn't have to flip through scrolls. They didn't have to Google search it. They knew exactly what scroll it was, the scroll of Micah. They knew exactly what section of that scroll to go to point out that passage where it said that the Christ was going to be born in Bethlehem. For us, that's Micah chapter 5, verse 2. But they knew the answer, Messiah, the King of Israel, the future, once and for all King of Israel. He will be born in the city of David, David's hometown, Bethlehem in Judah or Judea. Verse 7, then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. You're a little dubious about that too, a little skeptical? Yeah, that kind of reeks of a big old fat lie, I think. Maybe talk about that next week. Verse 9, after listening to the king, they went on their way, the wise men, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose, so this is the same bright light that they saw in verse 2, it went before them until it came to rest over the place where the young child was. Now, Bible scholars and Bible scholar wannabes make a big fuss over exactly what this star was. And it's comical to me to listen to their explanations, really. But you always have those people that want to explain everything that happens in the Bible in a very logical or scientific way, using natural things, naturally occurring phenomenon, naturally occurring events, and that's just not something you can always do. Sometimes you can do that, I think, when the scriptures lend themselves in that direction. But there's so much miraculous stuff in the Bible that you always have to be willing to abandon what you know about natural processes and just trust that the Lord pulled off a miracle. And this is one of those cases. And there's all sorts of, if you want to listen to them, explanations about, well, this was this constellation. Every so-and-so years, it lines up like this, and it puts this one star in this location, and on they go, and, this star did this on this day, and every cycle it comes around, and they'll try to tell you that this was just like the natural winding of the solar clock, and that on a certain year, there that star was, leading them to the city of Jerusalem. But that isn't how any of this went down. If you believe one of those astronomical theories to explain the star, that's totally fine with me. It really doesn't bother me. But I will tell you plainly that I give no credence to any of those claims. First of all, there are so many of them, and apart from the biblical context, they all sound very believable. But when I stick my nose in the biblical context, I'm kind of struck by the implausibility of all of the astronomical explanations. I don't see a natural occurrence or event that properly explains what took place here. What I see is a supernatural phenomenon. In this case, this star that's leading the wise men, I think it can only be a miracle from God, something God was providing specifically for them to see. In verse 9, it was the same star that they saw in verse 9. It has now reappeared to them. Just listen to this. You ever known any kind of constellation or star movement to do this? It appeared to them far out west, somewhere around the city of Jerusalem first, but now they're in Jerusalem. That same star or that same bright light reappears to them when they're in Jerusalem, and it goes not above them, but it goes before them, and it leads them to Bethlehem. And when it gets to the house where Christ was now dwelling, currently located, it hovers, it hangs just sort of right there above that house. Does that sound like constellation activity, star activity, astronomical event to you? It doesn't sound like any of that to me. First of all, if you are following a star in the sky, it's only going to lead you in one direction, and that is up. So I hope you have a SpaceX rocket. You are going to need it if you're following stars. I've never once seen a star that led me on the earth plane to a house or to a structure on the earth and then just sort of hovered above that. That's not something we have ever experienced or ever recorded apart from biblical history here. So that tells me for sure this was a supernatural phenomenon that cannot be explained by any regular astronomical event. I don't think so at all. It is possible that this quote-unquote star that they were seeing here, first in verse 2 and then in verse 9, was actually an angelic presence. That is absolutely possible, because if you look at Luke's account, it tells us on the night of his birth, what happened in the heavens? It was a host of angels lighting up the sky, announcing the birth, singing praise concerning the birth. Could it be possible that they saw that brightness? And after that singing and those angels ascended back to the Father, is it possible that that was the star that they saw rise? Is that possible? Yeah, that's possible. It's definitely more plausible for a bright angel that's blinding and all you can see is light to come down and go before you from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. Is it possible that this star is an angel? Yes, it is. It even matches up in terminology. We are told in the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 7, God gives us this account that during creation, the morning stars sang. The sons of God were rejoicing over God's creative act of creating the earth and all of the universe. And when he's speaking of stars there, morning stars, he's speaking of angels. And we see that term used interchangeably with angels a handful of times in the scriptures. That's possible. I'm not going to tell you that's what I believe All I know is it was something supernatural. It wasn't astronomical. Now, verse 10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Well, of course they did, because they had GPS back. You know how this is. You drive into someone's house, you've never been there, you're there for the first time, you lose GPS. When does it always happen? When you're close. Like, you need GPS more than anything right then and there. You know you're close, you know you're about to miss your turn, and right then GPS zongs out. That's frustrating. And when GPS comes back, when you finally get it back, you do this. You rejoice exceedingly with great joy, because now you know GPS is back. Now I can get where I need to get. Verse 11, and going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. So what stands out here is that these magi are not visiting Christ at the manger. Did you catch that? Jesus was in a house by this point, and he's probably not a baby anymore. The Bible says here that he's a child, and he's probably between 1 and 2 years old. We know that because Herod asks the Magi right there in verse 7. We read it. Hey, when did you first notice this? When did you see the star rise? Tell me when this all first went down. Trying to get a time frame on this. And why did he want that information? Because he was going to kill, in the next chapter, every child in that city from that time frame that was given to him until that point of time. And he chose kids, 2 years and younger. So that's the time frame right there to tell you how old Christ was. I assume he built some cushion into that. So you're probably looking at Jesus being around 1 to a 1.5-year-old young child here at this point, not a baby. That's when they show up. So technically, if you wanted your nativity sets, and I've shared this with you before, if you wanted your nativity sets to be accurate, here's what you're going to need to do. Go home after this service, take a crowbar, pry the wise men off of your nativity set if they're glued down, and then take them and go set them at the very edge of your driveway or perhaps across the road, because when Jesus is in the manger, they are traveling and they're a far distance away yet. So that's going to make it more accurate for you. Personally, I don't care if my nativity set is a little bit on the inaccurate side. I want all of the symbolism and all of the imagery there for the Christmas nativity set, right? Okay, let's wrap this all up here and put a Christmas bow on it. Remember the foundational question of this message. What was the foundational question? Having trouble speaking. I asked the question if 6 miles was too far to walk. Now, the reason I asked that question, the reason I gave that number specifically, is because that is about the distance from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. I'm rounding up. It's about 5.5 miles, but I'm going to round that up to 6 miles for the purpose of this study. 6 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And here, in the account that we just read, is one of the most baffling things that I think the religious leaders, the chief priests and the scribes, is one of the most baffling things that I think the religious leaders ever did. And that's saying a lot because they did a lot of baffling things. But this one, I think, takes the cake. In verse 2, we read that Magi show up from the east, and they say, okay, we're here. Where is he? Where's who? You know, the Messiah. He's been born. He's somewhere in the area. We've come to see the Messiah, the one that's going to be born king over the Jews. We're here to see him. They get that announcement. They hear that news, and we read in verse 5 and 6 that the chief priests knew exactly, if that were true, where they would find the Messiah. They knew exactly where that would take place. Now try to wrap your mind around this, Anchored. They had just heard the news. They knew what the news meant if it were true, and whether it was true or not. If it was true, Messiah was in Bethlehem that very day. If that announcement was true, if it really happened, then they knew that meant Jesus was in Bethlehem that very day. Well, they wouldn't know him by name, but they would know him as Messiah. So, 6 miles away from where they're reading their scrolls in Micah 5:2. Only 6 miles away. So, what we need here is a verse 6.5 that says, "And the chief priests and scribes then traveled the 6 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem to investigate this claim for themselves." That is what we need to see in this passage, and yet that is not what we read. There is no verse 6.5 here. They got the announcement. What did they do with that announcement? Nothing. They did absolutely nothing with that announcement. Why? Why not travel 6 miles to check this out? I mean, at worst, you waste a trip, and at best, you get to look in the face of your Messiah in the flesh. Why not do that? I'll be honest with you. There are times I would be tempted to walk 6 miles just to satisfy that food craving I have. There's probably days where I would do that. 6 miles is not a long distance. These guys are so close. They probably had access to camels and donkeys and horses. They could have done this in no time, and yet not a one of them made the trip from Jerusalem to Bethlehem to see if the claim of this Christ were true or not. I could give you a lot of possible reasons why it may be that they didn't act on this announcement. Some of the obvious ones to me would be spiritual apathy, spiritual lethargy, or something like unbelief coupled together with spiritual pride. You know, like, please. Like God would send the Messiah, sneak him in right under our noses, tell a bunch of pagan magicians, sorcerers, and not us, show them the stars and not us, like as if they could possibly know this and we not know this. We are God's chosen. It could be something like that. Could be a host of things, but what we really can know here, though not their exact reasons, what we really can know is that they had complete knowledge of what this meant, and they did nothing about that knowledge. They knew that the Messiah would be coming from the seed of a woman. They knew that he would be a descendant of Abraham. They knew that he would be a descendant of Jacob. They knew that he would be a descendant of King David. They knew that he would be born a virgin. Born of a virgin. They knew that he would be born in the town of David, the city of Bethlehem. But in spite of that complete knowledge, they did absolutely nothing with it on that day. And it just goes to show you that knowing about the Lord and coming to the Lord are two very different things. And they don't always go together, do they? And now for our contrasting figures from the story. How much did the Magi really know in comparison with the Jews? Yeah, they did have the time frame. They did know he was going to be the King of the Jews, this Messiah that was going to rule forever in Jerusalem. As far as they were concerned, he had nothing to do with them. He wouldn't be their king at all. They were from the east. Did they really know what this was going to accomplish, what this was really going to mean? I think there were a lot more questions on the Magi side of things as to what this meant, as opposed to on the Jewish side of things and the religious leaders. And yet, how far did they travel? Not merely 6 miles. I mean, you saw the map, right? When we study history on this travel from Babylon to Israel, it actually was made quite often. And we round this off based on all of the historical accounts that we have of that travel. One of them is the historical account given to us by Ezra and his caravan when they were leaving Babylon and returning to Jerusalem. We find out it is approximately 900 miles of travel. Not 900 miles as the crow flies, 900 miles of travel. Now, if you were a superhuman and you walked for 12 hours a day, every single day, you could do that trip in 25 days. But it took Ezra and his caravan 4 months to do. And that holds true with pretty much all of the other historical resources we have on this. It was usually done, the trip from Babylon to Jerusalem, over a period of about 4 months. 4 months of travel. Not 2 hours of travel, but 4 months. Not 6 miles of travel, but 900 miles of travel. The chief priests and scribes, they knew so much. They were so close to Jesus, and yet they did not come to him on that day. The Magi knew so little in comparison. They came so far, and through exhaustive efforts, they came to him. Remember, it wasn't just 900 miles. They had to do the last 6 miles, that last 6-mile leg of the trip from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. They put in all sorts of effort to come to Christ. So what an indictment against the religious leaders of the first century for knowing so much, for being so close, for giving so little. But what an even greater indictment against the current day unbeliever. How much easier is it for us to come to Christ right now? You don't have to travel 6 miles to know everything you could possibly want to know about Christ. All that takes nowadays is a couple clicks of a mouse, a couple left clicks, maybe a search engine search with some keywords here and there. All it takes is downloading a Bible app on your phone. All it takes is accessing the countless sermons and Bible teachings giving you knowledge of Christ and his gospel. I mean, it's ad infinitum on the internet. We have instant access to the saving knowledge of Jesus. We don't even have to walk 6 miles, and yet how tough is it for people to click the play button on a Christian video or sermon or song? How difficult is it to go and do a search for a Bible study or do a search to learn more about the gospel of Christ and his saving message? It's actually, the temptation is greater to click the X and click off of those things as it is to click on those things. But that's how close we are in our access to Christ these days and his gospel, his saving message. Now, it is true you do have to travel for church. I've got 7 miles to travel for church. And I promise you, if my vehicle breaks down and I have to walk 7 miles to get here, I will. The sermon might be shorter because I might be tired. I'm not as in good a shape as I used to be, not as young as I once was. But however far you have to travel to come to church, to learn more about him, to experience him, to be in his presence as he meets us here corporately. But come on, folks, you're not walking it. You're hopping in your comfortable car. And you know, it's got, nowadays, you got 2 thermostats. One for the driver's seat so that person can be just 72 degrees, and then one for the passenger seat so that person can be just perfectly 70 degrees. It's not a convertible all the time. You have a roof. You're dry. You're warm. In the summer, you're cool. Perfect temperature. Perfect comfortability. And yeah, you have to drive to church, but that's the extent of it. Aren't we human beings something? And I'm speaking about the unbelievers here. I really am. I'm not speaking about you guys, the faithful, those that have come to Christ. I'm speaking about the unbeliever here. There is no excuse for anyone on the day of judgment when it comes to salvation just because of how close everyone is. And though we may not all, especially the unbeliever, have the same kind of knowledge about the Messiah that these religious leaders did, it's all right there. A couple clicks away. A couple scrolls away. It's all right there. There's not going to be anyone that can have any kind of possible excuse that holds up in God's court of law on that day of judgment. So just as Christmas celebrates the birth of Christ, his birth brings salvation right to every one of us. And every Christmas follows this same exact story outline. It brings the knowledge of Jesus and his salvation right to our world. Some will be Herods. Those are the atheists that are hell-bent on destroying any kind of saving knowledge about Christ, just killing that out entirely. Some will be the religious who love their religion so much that they are lethargic and apathetic and unbelieving and just stubborn and unwilling to come to the saving knowledge that Christmas brings. But some will be wise men. Not magi. We don't want to emulate that, the magic part of things, but just wise men and wise women, folks that no distance or no obstacle will be able to prevent them from coming to Christ, not just for salvation, but over and over again for that constant filling of his Spirit. So they'll seek Jesus out, and because they seek Jesus out, they will find him. Let's stand, and we're going to close in a word of prayer.